Hello everyone, Sidewin here, and today I am going to be talking about homebrewing deities to fit different worlds. I generally run homebrew with Pathfinder and other systems, so I don't use the Galaron Pantheon. This is talking about my personal process of creating pantheons and deities for other worlds. So to start, I'm showing a model of what a deity stat block looks like here. So at the top of the stat block, there is the name of the deity and a title. For instance, in Pathfinder, there is Caden Cadane, the accidental god. This tells a little about the deity. Usually after this, there is a paragraph or so describing the deity, sometimes more. So this is your personal idea. It can help establish the tone of a stat block. The next important things to cover with a deity are the edicts and anathemas. The edicts are things followers are supposed to do. The anathemas are things they are supposed to not do. These impact clerics and champions the most, but they can impact any character that chooses to follow a deity. So these first three should all be tied together for flavor. So if you want a deity that focuses on being a god of the sea, you might name him, say, Poseidon, Lord of Earthquakes. And then edicts and anathemas could be various things, such as edict could be to worship him before going on a long sea voyage. An anathema could be to instead not show any respect for him or for other gods. Note, I am taking that from classical mythology. The next important thing to cover is areas of concern. So this is what areas the deity cares about. So for Poseidon, you would put, say, the ocean. This can reflect what different areas a deity's followers also care about, or when in polytheism this deity should be worshipped. Afterwards is the divine ability. This only applies for a certain background, which derives their ability from the deity, so you can mostly choose whatever you feel fits. The one after this is divine font. This is, do the clerics have a healing font or a harming font? This matters because it changes how the cleric class works. So a healing font deity is frequently associated with good, or with healing in particular. Harming font are usually associated with undead or evil in typical Pathfinder. However, this can vary, and some deities can allow either font. So if you're creating a fairly neutral deity that doesn't go either way, you should typically let them just let clerics choose between the two. The next area is the divine skill. Sometimes there's a certain skill which is very clearly associated with the deity, such as a deity of lies having deception. Other times there's one that's not so clear, such as a deity of a deity of cities. You might choose society in that case, or you might choose diplomacy or something that goes with the city. If there is no clear skill, you should consider a little what skills go with the type of abilities that the deity would have. The next spot is favored weapon. Favored weapons are only really important for clerics and champions, or anyone who wants to respect the deity by using the weapon. This weapon given is automatically granted to war priests. So you should take note of that, in that choosing an advanced weapon may be overpowered, because you would be giving a very powerful weapon to a cleric at level 1. Generally, favored weapons should be simple or martial weapons. These can also not necessarily be obvious, like a god of war might have an obvious one, say if he favors a sword, but a deity of healing likely wouldn't have an obvious one. So in that case, you can just consider what fits. For instance, a staff or sling may be a good choice for a healing deity, due to humility and similar domains of interest. The next two are domains and alternate domains. Domains are the choices of domains that clerics have to pick from. For instance, healing. Alternate domains are those that are the essentially splinter cults, to use that word for it. So the domains reflect the main profile of the deity in common thought. The alternate domains are the ones that are a specific group. So if you have a deity of the underworld, whose typical domains are death and undeath, alternate domains might be something like healing, or it might be the alternate domains just reflect a different profile of the deity. So some people may think of the deity as just god of war, whereas other groups might consider them to be a god of healing. It just varies depending on the deity. The last one is granted spells. So these actually modify a cleric's power. Typically in Pathfinder, deities give free spells to their clerics. However, some give 5 or even 9. These should only be 1 per spell level, and usually spells that are not on the divine spell list because they give additional options. If they are on the divine spell list, then the deity has less in this area. So an example of a deity that has 9 spells is Nethys in Pathfinder, who's the god of magic. The god of magic, it makes sense to give all 9 levels a spell. Whereas a deity who mainly focuses on war and provides a martial weapon, you should likely only give 3, because he's not a deity of magic. You may alternatively choose to give all your deities all 9 spell levels. However, this will increase the power of clerics that choose your deities. At this point, I'm going to go into different ways to create deity stat blocks depending on the system of belief the world is built on. The systems I'm going to be covering today are monotheism, polytheism, henotheism, and dualism, as well as touching on a few others. So the first one I'm going to go into here is monotheism. You can see on either side 2 ways of doing it. So on option 1, to create a monotheistic world, you might choose to just create a single deity. One pro of this is that it has less effort. It just takes less effort. You only have to create 1 stat block. You do not have to create multiple. However, it can cause a lot of sameness between different clerics and champions. This could actually be a positive if you want all clerics and champions to be similar. Say if your whole world is founded on the holy light and all the characters are supposed to be followers of it. This sameness can be beneficial. Option 2 is to create different stat blocks for different interpretations of the deity. Say, for instance, you have a goddess. She has many different interpretations to her followers. One of them is protecting them. Another is causing healing. So you would just create 2 stat blocks. A big pro of this is that clerics then have more variety and more ability to choose different things. However, this does take more effort and can cause differences and fractures, which could be a positive if you want this for conflict in your world. Say if you're going to do a plot focusing on a war between the groups that believe in one interpretation as opposed to another. So now that I've covered monotheism, I'm going to take a look at polytheism and henotheism. Polytheism and henotheism are the system defaults. Pathfinder is built off a polytheistic or henotheistic world. And note that these 2 are actually compatible. They do not conflict with one another. So polytheism is where a worshiper worships many gods and will change which deity they're worshipping depending on the situation. An example is the classical Greek pantheon, where a hero might worship Poseidon before going on a long sea voyage, but will instead worship Hermes before going on a land voyage, or worship Ares before going into battle. So a polytheistic worshiper, even a priest, will worship many different gods. Henotheism is instead believing that there are many deities, but you're only going to worship one. A historical example is the cult of Sol Invictus in Rome, which Constantine followed before converting to Christianity. Henotheists do believe in all the different gods. They just direct all their worship to one. So this can get them in trouble. So it just depends on your world here. You might insist that all clerics are henotheists for certain worlds, or you might allow them to just be polytheists in others. This is an important thing to consider about your world. You might have certain deities which have henotheistic cults, but are generally worshipped in the polytheistic way. So you should consider what you want there. Do you want an entirely polytheistic world, where characters worship many different gods depending on many different situations? Do you want henotheism to exist? If you don't, then you would make it so that characters are all polytheists. These are things that can also create conflicts. For instance, if the empire worships a certain deity, it may mandate that all of the people living in the empire also worship that deity. Henotheists will come into direct conflict with them, because a henotheist will only worship one deity. You could use this for many different plot points, and I just wanted to give a little to consider here. The last one I'm going to mention is dualism. Dualism is the belief that the universe has two equal and opposite forces. Common examples that you'll see are good and evil or light and darkness. This can be paired with both polytheism or bitheism. Polytheism, combined with dualism, will create a world where all the deities are arrayed on either one side or the other. So you have a group of good deities and you have a group of evil deities. This could be good if you want a lot of conflict between the two sides, while still having all the benefits of a polytheistic world. Bitheism, instead, is essentially monotheism, but with two deities. In the dualistic case, you're going to have one deity on one side and the other on the other. If your characters are all following the good deity, you should not allow a single character to follow the evil deity in the case of running a dualistic world. This will just create inter-party conflict. That is the important thing about dualism. If your world is based on dualism, you do not want people on opposing sides. You want to run the story with all the characters on one side unless you want a lot of conflict. Because in dualism, everything is sorted to be either good or evil, if the duality is good and evil, or everything is either light or darkness. And usually, with dualism, one side is considered to be good and true, whereas the other is considered to be innately evil. That's why good and evil is so common in dualistic philosophy. Some historical examples of this type of thing are Zoroastrianism and Catharism, although Catharism is very shrouded in myth and writings from their enemies. The Cathars historically believed that the world was divided into good and evil, but that the physical world was innately evil and the spiritual world was innately good. This is an example of how dualistic thought can combine with other systems. The last thing I'm going to cover here is other systems of belief. So one that you'll see come up not irregularly is the abandoned world. In the abandoned world, deities are gone. One thing that some GMs may consider here is that an abandoned world is good if you want less work when world building. However, this will reduce character choice, as to have an abandoned world, you have to remove the deities, thus removing clerics and champions in Pathfinder. Another example is bitheism or tritheism. In this, you have essentially monotheism, but with multiple deities. So if you want a world where there's a deity of femininity and a deity of masculinity, without bringing in dualism, bitheism could be a good choice. A final system I'm going to mention is animism, which is the belief that all objects have living spirits. To execute this in Pathfinder, you simply pair it with polytheism. If anyone has a question or comment, please ask in the comments. And if you have additional thoughts on this, also feel free. Please like and subscribe. I will see you in the future.